Hello, my name is Paola Di Giuseppe Antonio Di Franco, and as you could perceive from my accent and my very long surname, I come from Italy. I'm an archaeologist by training, and I studied medieval archaeology in Italy before moving to the United States in California, where I took a PhD in digital heritage and world cultures. And at Essex, I teach everything that is related to digital heritage, and navigating the digital world. For art history, I will offer two modules specifically next academic year, for the next academic year. One will be digital heritage and museums, and it will be addressed mainly to second and third year students. And then there will be a module called heritage and human rights. And today, just to give you a taster session and explain what what my real focus of research is, I want to introduce a discourse or a critical intake related to 3D digital and printed replicas of artifacts, with specific reference to how they might be used inside museums. This has been an ongoing research, which started in California, then continued at the University of Cambridge, where I did my postdoc, and it's now developing a little further thanks to my colleagues based at Art History at Essex. I was invited recently from the curator of the Art Exchange, which is our beautiful gallery at Essex, to give a talk about 3D digital replicas and post-colonial restitutions. As you might be aware of, there is now an ongoing debate related to artifacts which were looted during our colonial past, and a lot of communities in Africa, North America, South America are asking these artifacts back now. But there are a lot of complexities related to restitutions of the replicas, and museums which own the copyright in a way, right? Which feel that they are entitled to keep the replica, the original artifacts exactly where they are. Think about the British Museum in London, for instance, which has a lot of artifacts that come from Africa, all over the world, I would say, and they were partly looted or bought during our colonial past. So some museums have now thought that we could restitute these replicas digitally, but there are a lot of problems with these digital replicas. And I want to start with, let's see, can you still see my, yeah, I couldn't move the slides, but I think now everything is fine. So I want to start with a case of which was quite iconic, and it is renowned because this case circulated throughout the media for quite some time. I don't know if you are familiar with the bombing of Palmyra. Palmyra was a very important World Heritage Site in Syria, which was bombed by the ISIS in 2015. And, this news echoed and were, circulated a lot throughout any kind of media. And I can say that actually this circulation was a little surprising for me, because compared to other bombing events where a lot of people died in Syria, this had a more, more important circulation. So it was quite weird for a lot of people to see how it circulated. So, as I said, this site was bombed, almost completely destroyed, but not entirely. And what we can say, thanks to Forensic Architecture, which is an agency that reconstructed the whole bombing event, and then I will show you a slide about that, is that this event was staged, in the sense that these people wanted it to appear a bigger event than what in fact was really was. So after the event, 1 year after the event, the Digital Archaeology Institute, based at the University of Oxford, in collaboration with Harvard University and Museum of Dubai, decided to create a digital replica and then a 3D print of the main arch, which is this one. This was the main arch, the entrance to the site. using an Egyptian marble. So they used basically photographs. Through these photographs, they were able to recreate a digital replica of the arch, 1:1. And then they 3D printed it using a printer that could, reconstruct the arch starting from a piece of marble. And they then displayed for the first time this arch in Trafalgar Square. And this is the arch, and this is the ceremony. At the time, Boris Johnson was the mayor in London. He was present at the ceremony, and he declared that this arch was an act of that showed our technology and determination. And then our deputy mayor, which was Alicia Glenn, stated in her speech that the arch was first and foremost an act of solidarity with the people of Syria and the hundreds of thousands of people forced to flee their home, but also an expression of our awe of our shared history and humanity that transcends borders and nations. Basically, with this last claim, she was defining what we call now world heritage, something that is located somewhere. So it is local in a way. It also has national importance, but it is especially important throughout the world. It's our world heritage. Everyone in the world can relate. And Palmyra was considered one of these sites, world heritage sites. But then there was an archaeologist from Idaho University. Her name is Sarah Bond. She writes for Forbes, and she usually writes about antiquities and classic archaeology. And she wrote a very interesting piece where she was criticizing actually this arch. And she said, this is just digital colonialism. We are doing it again. We are reappropriating something that is not our past, our heritage. And we feel entitled to make a replica and circulate it. You have also to understand that this replica is now traveling because it went to Italy, it went to New York, Times Square. So it was displayed throughout the world, and it's traveling while a lot of Syrian refugees cannot move anywhere. They are stuck in their country and they risk their lives. So for Sarah Bond, this was outrageous, and it should not have happened. So there were a lot of critiques around this act. And again, as I said, the bombing event was quite little compared to some other events that happened in Syria in the same year and killed a lot of civilians. This, for instance, was the bombing of, I hope you can see my arrow while I point to the 3D prints. These were all 3D prints of clouds, bombing clouds that forensic architecture was able to reconstruct through photos. And they made prints and they displayed them at the V&A, Victoria and Albert Museum in London, to just show, the differences in the events. And this little bombing here, this little cloud is Palmyra. This big cloud is the bombing of MSF, the hospital of MSF, where more than 100 civilians and doctors died just for one event. So they were just like trying to reveal the fact that, this bombing of Palmyra was nothing compared to other bombings which happened during the same year. And, they didn't have the same echo. So that said, because of all these critiques, because we believe that, this arch, they spent also a lot of money for this arch, and they could have spent this money to help the refugees in London, for instance, Syrian refugees. We don't even know if the Syrian refugees were involved in this process of recreation of the arch, if they wanted it, There's nothing that was revealed related to this community of refugees. So considering these critiques, should we think that the replicas are useless? Not really, and I can show you why. Because there are a lot of events of reconstruction, of replication of what was lost that were taking place in Syria and elsewhere, and were organized by Syrian refugees just to heal. It's a way to heal and reconnect with something that, your heritage that was lost. So in this case, I'm showing a slide, a photo of a Syrian artist that was displaced in a Jordan camp, in a camp, refugee camp in Jordan, and was recreating sites and monuments that were lost during the conflict using clay that he found on site and skewer sticks, wooden skewer sticks. And the same was happening in a similar period in Italy, for instance, after the earthquake, which partially destroyed a lot of towns in 2016. Here we are in Amatrice, close to Rome, where the historic center of this beautiful town was completely erased by the earthquake in 2016. And there are two photos that were shared on social media, Twitter and Facebook. This one on your left side was the photo of a mom who wanted just to share how her son was trying to recreate the historic center of Amatrice using wooden blocks. And then the other photo shows this elder who was recreating iconic monuments lost during the earthquake using wood. And his nephew decided to share this photo and asked also if people could send him a few photos of the cathedral, because that was the next project his grandfather wanted to focus on. So it's clear that there is a lot of potential and there is an importance in these replicas because they help to heal. We want to have something back, something that was lost, and we can reconnect with this lost heritage through the replicas. The main problem, though, is related to the many definition of heritage, because it's related to who decides which replicas we should make, and who should decide also who should make the replicas and how should they make these replicas, who should own the replicas, who should own the rights on the replicas, right? And this, as I said, it's quite complex. These questions, answer to these questions is also quite complex, because it depends on how we define heritage. So Palmyra, as we said, has a locality, right? So it is important probably to the people who used to live around the site, right? And then it was a site of national importance, which could define a small portion of Syrian heritage. But it was also defined as World Heritage. So if we decide that this site of Palmyra is a World Heritage site, it means that everyone could be entitled to recreate a digital replica. And the Digital Archaeology Institute didn't do anything wrong. I mean, they just feel that this is their heritage and they're entitled to rebuild it. Now, if we move from lost heritage to 3D digital replicas in the context of objects which were looted during our colonial past, this recreation, this replication becomes even more complex. Why? Because we don't really know if digital replicas can be considered a form of restitution, right? So who should keep the replica and who should keep the original? Should the original go back to the country where it is from, so that the replica can stay in the museum where, that restitutes the original, or it's the other way around? So there is a lot of debating around, these issues of 3D digital replications. I have my own personal view. I think that 3D digital replication cannot be a form of restitution. And this is the same view I share with the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, for instance. The Smithsonian Institute has been involved in a lot of projects of restitution of original artifacts to pueblos, Indian pueblos, Native American pueblos. And they recently did a very nice collaboration with the Tlingit community in the Pacific Northwest, where they co-created digital replicas of artifacts from this community. They gave back the original and they kept the replicas. and you have one example in this slide. Now, there are a few risks associated with these kinds of projects. One is that, these replicas were made using expensive infrastructure, and this was owned by the museum that might reinforce power relationships because the museum has the money to purchase this infrastructure. But I can answer to this that today we can make 3D digital replicas of artifacts just using a camera, even our mobile camera, so you can just use your mobile phone, take a lot of pictures, and then thanks to a few software, even open source software, you can recreate a 3D digital replica of objects inside museums. And then there are copyright issues. Let's say that the original is damaged or lost. Then the replica is owned by the Smithsonian. So there will be new copyright issues there, right, related to the replica and who should own this replica. Then there are cases in which, as I said, the restitution of artifacts happen just virtually. There are a few projects that are also very nice, I would say, in which basically museums or institutions, cultural institutions, have collaborated always with native communities from Canada or the United States. And they've basically co-created databases or web pages and given access to these archives just to the communities that are owning, the rights over their heritage, and the members of these communities have also decided how to organize their archive or their web page, so and how to display basically narratives and objects. And then there are finally cases in which there's no restitution whatsoever, neither virtual restitution or the restitution of the original artifact. This was a very renowned case, for instance, in Berlin. The Neue Museum in Berlin has the bust of Nefertiti, which is one of the most important artifacts of the Egyptian heritage. And basically, they made a high-resolution scan of this bust, but decided not to release it publicly. And two artists went to the museum, and using a Kinect camera, they made a 3D replica of the bust, and they released this 3D scan for free as a torrent file, which is online. So if you check the names of these artists, Nikolai Neltz and Nora Albadri, you will find also the torrent file, and you will find a very nice webpage where they explain why they decided to do what they did. So with this, act of digital restitution, they also revitalized, in a way, regenerated, revived the artifact, because they assigned a new political meaning to the artifact through the replica and the fact that it was released, right? So when an artifact, instead of being defined as an archaeological artifact, becomes heritage, we should really consider it as a continuous process rather than a moment frozen in time, which means that we should study the biography of this object. And the replica becomes a little part of this whole biography. Why? Because objects have an origin, which is what we call the hinc and nunc in Latin, which means they were created in a specific time and space by a specific culture. And through the study of their origins, we can understand, where these objects come from. But then they have a long lifespan, and we assign meanings to the objects also today in the present, and these meanings are new meanings, new values that we can give to these objects. That can be also political, because now, for instance, the bust of Nefertiti is important not just because of its origins, but also because it was looted, and it's now in Berlin, and there are communities that are asking these people, these museum curators, to have the bust back in some way, right? So object biographies is a kind of very nice theoretical framework to study material culture, past material culture. And Goldstein and Marshall wrote a very nice piece in this book called The Social Life of Things, Commodities in Cultural Perspective, edited by Appadurai, where they say the notion of biography is one that leads us to think comparatively about the accumulation of meanings in objects and the changing effects these have on people and events. The central thread of comparison, however, makes the variety of relationships between people and things in different cultural contexts even more apparent. So according to these theories related to the biography of things, what matters when we study material culture, past material culture, are all the meanings and values that can be assigned to these objects through times. And so when we think about 3D digital replicas, we shouldn't really consider them a new way to preserve the objects, but actually a way to perpetuate it, as curator Brendan Comier from the V&A has claimed very well. So it means that we should consider how through the replica we can regenerate the meanings of this past material culture. And I've been quite interested in this concept of perpetuation. And I'm collaborating with a lot of artists recently. One was Ihsan Kurbash. He's a Syrian artist based at Christ College at Cambridge. And he created this work called Dark Water, Burning World. The first installation, the first artwork was created using artifacts from the Fitzwilliam Museum at Cambridge. These artifacts are 3 small boats, iron boats, with goddesses on tops, and they are still on display at the Fitzwilliam Museum. And he basically used these goddesses, which represent the richness of the Syrian culture and the importance that the Mediterranean had for this culture throughout history. He contrasted these figurines to a few boats he created with matches on top, and these matches represent the struggle and the continuous challenges and risks of the communities of Syrians who take the boats to try and be rescued because of the ongoing conflict which started back in 2012. And then, so after this installation, he wanted to bring this artwork somewhere else, and the problem arose because he couldn't lend these objects. So I created a 3D digital replica in collaboration with a colleague from Italy, and we 3D printed it, and we gave it to Ihsan Kurbash, and he could just take this one of those boats and bring it everywhere. And so displays artwork using a 3D print. In this way, basically, the object, the replica, has regenerated the meanings of the goddesses and of the artifacts, which is still at the Fitzwilliam Museum. And then there was another interesting project by artist Martha McKean. She's based in London, and she used a few objects. She selected a few objects from the digital library of 3D objects created by the British Museum, and created what I could call a kind of chimera, another object that is made using pieces of very important replicas of very, very important artifacts that are stored and preserved at the British Museum. And she basically was reflecting on this idea of how far from the original the meaning of the replica could go. Because once you release a 3D digital replica of an artifact publicly, this could be manipulated and manipulated and manipulated to the point that its original meaning just disappears. It fades. Does this mean, again, that we should renounce, we should get, just renounce to make the replicas because there are risks associated to the exploitation of the replicas? I personally believe that we should continue to make the replicas because, all the possibilities and the chances involved in the performances and the manipulation and the regeneration of these replicas are more than the risk and the endangerments, basically. And I was recently reading a book written by a philosopher, an Italian philosopher called Marina Montanelli. The book is titled principle of repetition, and she gave a rereading of Walter Benjamin. Walter Benjamin is an important philosopher for art historians, and you will know a lot about him if you start attending modules with us, because he engages a lot on the idea of art and artworks and replication. And he says, you know, original artifacts have an aura, and the aura is in time and place. The aura is linked to the ritual dimension of the work of art, and the art becomes entangled with tradition through ritual, which is first magical and then religious. Think about, you know, the first pieces of artwork in prehistoric context. You know, they were made inside caves, and we think that they were related to rituals and religious rituals, and they had a lot of symbolic meanings, right? So it is clear that there is something that is magic or really, you know, religious, that is linked to the aura of the original artifacts. Then when, you know, we make the replicas, technical reproduction, according to Walter Benjamin, detach the replica from tradition. So the ritual power of the aura is interrupted, and this interruption is perceived as a decline, but it can also be a chance at the same time. By permitting the copies to move beyond its original time and place, it also reactivates the object produced. So the replica, as we said, reactivates the objects. To the point that, you know, if we think about what we can do to replicas inside museums, we can, through the replicas, we can make museums more fluid, because objects can be also touched and manipulated, not also looked at. They can be lent, they can be quickly moved from one museum to another, from one community to another, and they become fluid materiality because they can go online. So they are more open to multivocality. Not only the narratives of the curators inside the museums, not only the narratives of the scholars who discovered them, but also the narratives that can be created by people who interact with these replicas in their own way, which becomes more intimate, which becomes performative, which is multisensorial. So we can have new forms of affect, emotional engagement with these objects, and a personalized experience with them. And even though I believe that, you know, again, a virtual replica, a digital replica cannot be a form of restitution, it can definitely become a way for these communities to revive a discourse around colonialism, post-colonialism, and restitutions, while they wait for the originals to come back. And with this, I conclude, and I hope I can open this up to you, and there will be a few questions.